In the far-flung future, Thundarr and his companions fight a scruffy wizard, tiny men in tiny ships, a dude with snake arms, and a lava monster. Just another Saturday morning. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
Today we're getting to, well, it turns out our second cartoon of the season, because we ended up doing the mini monsters. But this one is Thundarr the Barbarian, an adventure cartoon from 1980 and 1981. 21 episodes, and aired on ABC.
Yes, and then oddly enough, NBC picked it up for reruns in 1983, I think. So it was on ABC 2 seasons and then moved to NBC.
Just like Different Strokes.
Yes, just like Different Strokes. One of the many ways in which those two shows seem to have parallel tracks.
Yeah. And it was made by the Ruby Spears Company, which I guess was in its early days at the time. And Ruby and Spears used to work for Hanna-Barbera and created Scooby-Doo, among other things, and then moved on and started doing their own work. From what I can have gathered from a YouTube video and stuff, we're interested in kind of targeting some things at a slightly older audience than the usual Saturday morning cartoons, and developed this idea.
Yeah.
As they called it, Tarzan in space, although it's not really in space. I mean, it is in space because Earth is in space, but...
Yes, we're all in space, are we not?
Yes, yeah.
But I know what you mean.
And we're in the podcasting space.
Yes, we are. You know, I don't think a lot of those early Ruby Spears efforts really would indicate that adult or older oriented approach.
No.
Like, for example, Plastic Man, I think was before this, right? And that was an early one. Bang Face.
Right.
But I can see evidence of that watching Thundarr, though.
Yeah, but then I don't think they followed that up. The other things I think of after that would be like Alvin and the Chipmunks and Mr. T.
Yes.
You know, a lot of other things like that, more sort of Hanna-Barbera-y things.
Yeah, I mean, would it take until you get to like there was that 1988 Superman cartoon that was Ruby Spears?
Oh, right, yeah.
On CBS, I think. But man, that's almost a decade after they began. Well, they've got to make money, you know, and do what sells. And also, you know, there's that truism that you can have intentions when starting a Saturday morning show, but sooner or later the network's going to get involved and you might wind up doing kind of what the network wants too.
Correct, yeah. So I don't know if this had lasted longer, if it would have gotten toned down more, or a sort of Filmation injection of silly humor. But not that Thundarr is humorless, but they definitely don't have like a kid character or Orko.
No, there was not a blatant effort to present a moral.
No.
You know, and it like watching it now, it does have elements of, you know, that kind of Filmation universe, and even like it's very reminiscent of some Hanna-Barbera cartoons, of course, you know, down to some of the sound effects and things like that. So I found myself kind of almost expecting there to be, if not some, you know, blatant addressing the camera moral at the end, something clear along the way. But this series, from you know, the limited exposure I have to it now, it just seems kind of focused in on the adventure and the action.
Yeah, I mean, I think the moral, if there is one, just comes through Thundarr and his companions' dedication to stopping cruelty and sort of slavery and things like that.
Right. It's sort of basic concepts of good versus evil, but not branching off into, you know, separate, more specific things, it seems like, which is kind of refreshing after a lot of the cartoons we've covered on the podcast, and some more of what, you know, like we've talked about, we remember from 1980s animation. It's kind of cool. I mean, it's very short, but they're kind of in and out of there, and they move along, and it's almost refreshing to have, you know, the lack of some of those other blatantly kid-oriented and humor elements, you know, pandering almost to certain audiences. I think that's why this really stands out to me looking at it for the podcast.
Sometimes there's a creature character who, you know, they have him be comic relief a little bit, but it's just some slapsticky stuff. And there's one episode where they travel back to present day Earth. There's a little girl in that. So but it's one episode. It's not every episode. And it really does seem there's an ambition to this show that surprised me when I started watching them. I mean, I got the DVDs a couple years ago, sort of in anticipation of doing it on here, but it really stood out. And some of that has to do with a lot of the people working behind the scenes, too.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask you about that because you had suggested this. This has been on our radar for a while now, and I was curious. Is this a show that you watched that you remembered for the show itself? Is it more like an interest in the behind the scenes aspects of it? What kind of put this on the radar for the podcast?
When it was on, I watched it, and it was cool when I was 7 because it's adventure and science fiction and a guy with a laser sword
Yeah,
and watching it now, I can see, yeah, it's just jam packed full of weird stuff that would appeal to little kids. And, my brother and I were into it. But then I think this YouTube thing, which is a documentary from some previous, like a DVD compilation of Warner Brothers cartoons or something. I happened to watch that, or I was curious, something, I got to be in my bonnet somehow, and saw that on YouTube, and it made me want to watch it even more. I think that's what started, and then learning behind the scenes stuff from that and from Mark Evanire's blog. So, some of the writers involved, for instance, include Steve Gerber, who created Howard the Duck, among other comics characters. Buzz Dixon, who, of course, wrote for G.I. Joe and created BOTNS favorite Hector Ramirez.
yeah. Shout out to Buzz.
Yeah. Mark Evanier, who we've mentioned many times, the cartoon writer, variety show writer, comics writer, sitcom writer, prolific blogger.
Gag writer, fast writer, self-professed. Not to say sloppy, but that's one of the things he's known for. Is
He created or co-creator of Gru the Wanderer, who's sort of a comedic comic book character who's also a barbarian type. Ted Peterson, whose name I don't really recognize, but he seems to have a lot of cartoon credits. Christopher Vane, who went on to do a lot of sitcoms. Marty Pasco, who we've mentioned too, prolific DC Comics writer mostly, and also worked on Buck Rogers and other TV shows. Roy Thomas, who was sort of Stan Lee's protege at Marvel Comics and a one-time editor-in-chief there. And this has delighted me to no end. I suggested the particular episode we're going to do and described it to Rick as almost Jeffrey Scott-like. And then I was looking at the credits of this episode, which is from the second season, and lo and behold, he's listed with all these other writers.
yes. Then maybe they brought him on. He added that Scott touch.
Yeah, they're like, this is not nutty enough. So, because I don't think it's in the season 1 episodes, and then the other interesting aspect to me, and I think to comics fans especially. So Alex Toth did the original designs of the main characters, and he was a comics artist and also designed like the Super Friends and Space Ghost and a lot of adventure cartoon designs in that period. And then he left the show or had other obligations, and Mark Evanier suggested that his old boss, who was fed up with the comics industry, Jack Kirby, should come on. And you can, if you know Jack Kirby's work at all and you watch this show, you can see his imprint all over the place.
Sure.
In monsters and robots and the wizards and just the opening credits, this two-faced character definitely, looks like a Jack Kirby character. There's one episode with a guy where the wizard, most of the villains are wizards, has an airship that has a giant version of his head on the front of it. And it's already a Jack Kirby head, and just that.
I like that.
So it has a unique look. And then in terms of ambition, the other thing is, most cartoons, you think of He-Man, a similar cartoon.
He-Man.
They set up a world, but you're usually in familiar places, right? And there's a set of characters, and you keep seeing the same set of characters. Other than the 3 main characters and 2 characters you come back in one episode, every episode has different characters and is in a different location. Now, there are a lot of swamps and some deserts, but it seems like, they kind of were starting from the ground up every episode. And that's pretty amazing for a Saturday morning cartoon, I think.
That's something I hadn't thought of, and that's really an excellent point. And yeah, many of the other cartoons rely on, familiar situations, familiar characters. Not always a bad thing, but that is really interesting. And I think you're absolutely right. Many series would not do that. Even live action series were hesitant to do that during this time period. They would go back to the old, the crutches and the tried and true whenever possible, it seems like.
Yeah. And, they do, they do reuse animation, and they do have the scrolling backgrounds and things like that you would expect. But as someone in that documentary said, that Ruby Spears cartoons like this, at least, that there's always a sense of motion too. It's not just people standing around talking and just moving their head or something. So it's not as limited animation can be.
Yeah, and what I've seen, not a lot of reliance on, kind of going along with what you just said, not a lot of reliance on close-ups. You'd see some interesting shots, even if there wasn't like wall-to-wall action in a given scene. You might have you'd see like the cool, like a backdrop or something else interesting, rather than just, tilting the camera 45 degrees and having, Thundarr's lips moving. And, one thing I read, Mike, I'm not sure where it was, but that, and I'm not sure if this was a conscious decision, but whatever I read made it sound like it was. The idea being that, well, they knew that the animation was going to be limited by time and budget. So that was part of the effort. Part of the reason for the effort that went into making the character design as distinctive as possible, because they figured, well, we might not have a ton to work with on once we get going here, but at least we can have like really cool designs and, and distinctive characters that will be memorable at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it works. Sometimes some things look a little off.
If anything, and, we can talk about some of these characters, but if anything, Thundarr to me became less distinctive, not because of Thundarr himself, but because of other things that came after this cartoon. By that I mean just, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I kind of have vague memories at the time of thinking just sort of in a weird way, like loosely resembled Thundarr to me. And I didn't really watch Thundarr as a kid, but I remember being aware of it, and that old thing of seeing the ads in the comic books. That's kind of how I knew a lot of Thundarr. I'm sure I watched some of it, but I didn't go out of my way to watch it. I think part of it maybe was the time slots and who knows else. So I didn't have a whole lot of experience with it, but you can see some similarities with Thundarr and stuff that came before it and after it. But
well, he and He-Man have the same haircut.
Yes.
Let's be honest. And I had only learned recently from that Spectre Creative YouTube channel that, Masters of the Universe, in part, the toy development grew out of a failed attempt to do toys of the Fourth World stuff that Jack Kirby had done for DC. And so there's a connection there, too, because they reused some of the designs they had based on that. So there are Kirby elements in He-Man, even though he wasn't involved in it.
It's all connected.
Jack Kirby truly is. I mean, the more you hear this stuff, you realize that if you were into any of that, Marvel Comics, obviously, and DC to a lesser extent, but things like this too, that, he really was influencing pop culture of our youth long before some of his ideas made it into the mainstream in these movies and things that we're seeing now.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, the DC is still using a lot of Jack Kirby's concepts, for some like their main villains in the movies. So the legacy continues even in DC, which, not even arguably, but the sort of secondary company that he worked for, quote unquote. But it's amazing. It's almost Jeffrey Scottish, Jeffrey Scott-esque, the influence the man has.
Yeah.
Two geniuses, Jack Kirby and Jeffrey Scott, in the same episode here.
Yeah, possibly. We don't know what Jeffrey Scott, because of course it's animation credits, so
yes,
who knows? Other than one episode, I'm absolutely sure Mark Evanier wrote.
Hey, and this
just because it has some elements that are familiar from his blog, but there's a whole thing on
tomato soup.
On tomato soup, yes. Anyway, you were gonna say?
Oh, I was going to say it kind of pleased me seeing rascally Roy Thomas in the credits here. He was kind of like the token sword and sorcery guy. It seemed like for a long time doing like Conan and in comic book form, and anytime they had something like that, they would go to Roy Thomas. So it was cool seeing him. I'm not sure, how much influence he had. But the other thing kind of going to the credits is the series does that frustrating thing of listing a voice cast, which I guess is for the whole season, right? So, which is rather annoying. I mean, I think in the episode we're talking about, we didn't really have any problems, and there were only a handful of characters. Well, I guess there was a decent amount of speaking roles, but a handful of new characters. But that's really a big pet peeve of mine, watching a cartoon and not having individualized voice credits for that episode.
Yeah, me too. So the concept of the show, and then I think we should mention the voices for those of you who haven't seen it, and since Rick hadn't seen much of it, maybe many of you hadn't. In the far future of 1994. A runaway planet. A meteor, not an asteroid, not a comet, but a runaway planet flew between the Earth and the Moon and cracked the Moon in half and caused a cataclysm, tidal waves, and they're showing a lot of this in the opening credits. Just absolute destruction, and that's cool because the destruction and stuff never shows up in the show. I mean, they had unique animation for the credits for parts of it. I'm not even sure there's a thing where they're talking about how Thundarr escaped, being a slave or something, and I don't think that's from anything else because they don't have an episode about that. But anyway, it caused this cataclysm, and 2,000 years later, the show takes place, and it's this world of super science, magic, and barbarians, and wizards, and mutants, and people living off of the remains of 1990s Earth. So already, I mean, that's ambitious too. That's like a kind of heavy-duty idea for Saturday morning.
Yes.
It's a little different than teenagers solving mysteries.
Right. Yeah, you're starting off from a kind of a grim perspective.
Yes. So you have Thundarr, who's, of course, a barbarian, and he has this laser sword called the Sun Sword, which is magical in some way, and it's a laser sword. And he can fend off magic with it, and he can do all sorts of things other than kill people, of course. And then Princess Ariel, who's a sorceress and also seems to be a font of knowledge about old Earth. And then this sort of, I don't know, lion-y, bear-like walking guy, Ukla the Mock. And I've been saving this joke for months now. Do you remember that glam band, Ukla the Mock?
Yeah. Oh, they were so influential in England.
They were. They didn't quite ever hit it over here, but
No, but everybody that was a fan of Ukla the Mock started a band.
yeah, exactly. Anyway, he's sort of the the Chewbacca of the thing, because of course this is being developed and everything when Star Wars hit too. So it's got a little bit of that, not too much, but a little bit, and some Conan and things like that. So as Thundarr, Robert Ridgely, who did a lot of cartoon voices but also on-screen acting. The biggest role that stood out to me was the distributor of certain films that Burt Reynolds made in Boogie Nights.
Ah.
I think the Colonel or something.
Ah, interesting. Yes, and of course, in a few years, he would go on to co-found Wham with George Michael, right?
Right, yes. And Nellie Bellflower as Ariel, who I think did a lot of voice acting. And then Fred Flintstone 2.0 himself, Henry Corden as Ukla the Mock.
Yes, and a fine Fred Flintstone. And for a lot of people, I'd say that a lot of people grew up on him as Fred Flintstone and not Alan Reed. But then again, like for most of us, we probably had both of them because with the Flintstones were on NBC, including at this time in 1981. And, also the Flintstone reruns were, of course, the 1960 show was everywhere as well. So,
yeah, and Fruity Pebbles commercials.
Ah, yes, of course.
And Cocoa Pebbles. Yeah. And I mean, when he's doing Ukla, he's just growling and it doesn't stand out. But
yeah, I wouldn't have recognized him from just Ukla.
But he does a lot of the other characters too. I think in this one he's doing one of the villains, and in another one he definitely was doing like the wizard character. And I just kept expecting him to say "Bon" at the end of lines. So, they make a good solid core, and then people like all sorts of voice people show up. Joan Van Ark, Nancy McKeon is in a couple episodes, and Skeletor himself, Alan Oppenheimer, does voices. So, good stuff all around.
Yeah, pack a lot of talent into less than a couple dozen episodes.
Yeah. So, since this is your area, what about it in terms of the schedule and stuff?
Ah, well, it's interesting. So the episode we're going to talk about today is from the show's second season, and it's called City of Evil. If that doesn't get you excited for Thundarr, I don't know what will. City of Evil. But it premiered October 3rd, 1981. And, it's one thing that I've found that we both found is, Saturday mornings is a time when schedules can be inconsistent. Even something that starts in the fall can change quickly. And usually, a lot of times, like the Saturday morning schedule in the spring is much different than it is in the fall. So it's not always easy to get accurate listings, but I do know more or less what else was on that day. And I can go through that. And then also maybe I'll have another interesting note about the ABC schedule right after this. So on ABC, I started with 8 in the morning on Saturday, October the 3rd. So they start out with the Super Fun Hour, as I saw it in the TV listings and the program listings. This was basically the Super Friends at 8, followed by Heathcliff and Marmaduke at 8:30. Haven't you always wanted those titanic forces to team up, the Super Friends and Heathcliff and Marmaduke as well?
Yeah, that's a dream team right there.
I'm telling you, Mike, if we get Mark Evanier on the show, we've got to ask him about this whole hour thing. Because It's all over the place on this particular day.
That's a particularly interesting one. I don't know. I,
Yes, well, I've got another interesting one for you because at 9 o'clock on ABC, we had the Fonz Scooby Doo Hour. And I think this is a temporary thing for something that I'll get into in a minute, but that's how it was listed. And at 10 o'clock, it was Richie Rich and Scrappy Doo. Although I think technically it was the Richie Rich Scooby Doo Scrappy Doo hour, something like that, but they were combined. At 11, you had Thundarr, followed by Goldie Gold. And I think I think that might have been combined as a Thundarr Goldie Gold show at one point too. And then 12 o'clock, college football on ABC. So, and there were some interesting games that day. Oklahoma had a shocking tie with Iowa State. USC was number one team, I think they were in action. So it would depend on what area you were in. That was regionalized, I believe, but that was ABC.
USC used to be on TV all the time.
Yeah, they really had a big national profile at the time.
Yeah.
Maybe like the team of the West Coast, I guess.
Or maybe you'll bring this up, but the Fonz thing is interesting because according to Mark Evanier, the Thundarr got canceled not because of ratings or violence even, but because Gary Marshall wanted to start doing, the Happy Days cartoon and Laverne and Shirley cartoon. And
Well, I looked into that. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. So this is October 1981. The very next week, October 10th, 1981, it became Fonz and Laverne and Shirley. So Laverne and Shirley actually debuted like the next week after this, okay? Laverne and Shirley was on there, and then in 1982, the next season, Thundarr was out and Mork and Mindy was in. So kind of giving credence to Mark Evanier's assertion, I saw that he said Thundarr got booted to make way for another half hour for Gary Marshall, and it does seem kind of forced to put a Mork and Mindy cartoon. Although, that's probably a better idea than, like, say, a Making It cartoon or the new Odd Couple. I don't know if you're going to do a Gary Marshall show in there, but I kind of wonder, though. I mean, I didn't really see any evidence for that other than Mark and Evanier just saying it was the case, whereas other sources said that the network had a problem with the violence. One thing I noticed, too, is in 1982, there was a couple other new shows, Pac-Man, Little Rascals. So ABC added other shows as well as just Mork and Mindy. So whatever reason the case was, Thundarr got squeezed out. And in fact, in the second half of this season, so like winter 82, Thundarr was moved to like 8:30 or something like that. I think it's sort of switched places essentially with Heathcliff and Marmaduke. So again, you see like that tinkering of the schedule, and I don't know, it doesn't really indicate to me that like the show is thriving if they moved it in the first place. And it doesn't seem to me like an 8:30 show. It seems like it would be more appropriate later in the day when maybe older kids might be watching it. But I'm not saying I don't believe Mark Evanier, but it's kind of an odd story if the show got kicked off just for that reason.
yeah, I will always believe Mark Evans. But
That's fair enough.
well, and I mean, it did get me thinking, like, how accurate would ratings really be for Saturday morning cartoons? I mean, if you're a Nielsen family, are you having your 6-year-old keep track of that? Are you just asking them?
Yeah.
Or do you have to watch all the cartoons with them to make sure to keep good records?
Did Nielsen get a bunch of those little yellow ratings diaries with like, milk and cereal all over the pages?
Right.
Because they were letting the kids fill them out?
Yeah, and then they had to interpret like a 7-year-old's handwriting.
Yeah.
This looks like an R, but it's backwards.
We had a Nielsen diary for a very brief period of time, and we did not do ours in crayon. I think they discouraged that, but maybe they did accept it. I don't know. But your point is well taken. I would think that Saturday morning would be one of the least reliable time periods they would have for ratings.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, who knows? I mean, Joe Ruby didn't seem to know, so.
Yeah.
In that YouTube thing, he said it was the violence. So, but he's not around anymore. So,
even years later, Joe Ruby was afraid of crossing Gary Marshall.
Yes,
that's what it was. Nobody wanted to say anything on the record about Gary Marshall.
I mean, that part, not that part, but the Mark Evanier's, pointing out that in 1981 or 1982, Gary Marshall was so powerful at ABC that he could get as many cartoons as he wanted. I believe that.
Yeah, it's totally plausible, and prime time is so valuable, and Saturday morning is probably seen more of like, playground and kind of the scraps, and yeah, it makes sense to me, yeah. Saturday mornings are just a weird time in general, I think, with all this scheduling stuff. Quickly, I'll go over what it was on the other networks this day. NBC at 8 had the Flintstones, and I think it was some version of the Flintstones comedy show, some incarnation of that with Henry Corden, of course, as Fred. The Smurfs at 8:30, and that was an hour because at 9:30 you had the Kids Super Power Hour. 10:30 was Space Stars, which is kind of an anthology with different segments in it with Hanna-Barbera characters. Again, another hour-long show. 11:30 we had Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. 12 o'clock, the Daffy and Speedy show. So Daffy Duck and Speedy Gonzales. And then 12:30, reruns of The Venerable Bullwinkle. closing off kind of the day for NBC. Now on CBS, they had a couple of new shows, new for 1981. They start out with Quickie Koala at 8 o'clock, Trollkins at 8:30. 9 o'clock, they had the Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner show, which was an hour and a half. 10:30 was a half-hour Popeye show, with new Popeye cartoons. 11 o'clock was Black Star, not to be confused with Brave Star. And then 11:30 had the Tarzan Lone Ranger hour. So again, more characters combined. And one thing that stands out to me at CBS is the fact that they had that Bugs Bunny Roadrunner block for 90 minutes. And then it's just funny that they split up those cartoon packages so that you had Daffy and Speedy Gonzales on another network at noon on that, that same morning.
Yeah, I still don't get that. I don't really get the pairing of Daffy and Speedy Gonzales either.
No.
and Black Star was on 11?
Yes.
So it was competing with Thundarr.
Yeah.
And because I was going to say Black Star, not to be confused with Thundarr.
Yes. If I remembered more about Black Star, I probably would confuse it with Thundarr, but it's not an issue for me.
It was a filmation, a kind of bit of Tarzan, a bit of John Carter. I believe the Black Star character was a bit of Buck Rogers too, an astronaut or something who ended up on this other planet. There was a villain and there was a sword, and there were two parts of the sword, so it was a little bit of He-Man too, before He-Man. And then there were these like gnome, dwarf kind of hobbity characters. So yeah, a little more kid friendly than Thundarr. And I definitely watched that too, so I don't know. Did my allegiances change? Or maybe that's why they moved Thundarr?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it looks like while Thundarr moved, Black Star stayed pretty much in that same time slot until through fall of 1982. Then it was gone. So
they did make toys of that though.
Yes, I do remember those toys. Yeah.
Although I think maybe the toys came out a couple years later after the cartoon was well off the air.
Ooh, suboptimal timing there.
Kind of to, make some He-Man money.
Yeah.
So interesting. I'm also curious about what was it called? On NBC, the Superpower Hour or something?
The Kids Superpower Hour, which added Shazam at one point. I think it was a mix of live action and animation.
The old Shazam, the 70s Shazam?
No, I believe it was new animation that was done for that. New old animation? No, there were animated shorts, I think.
Okay. There was some like variety show aspect to it, I think.
Yes. Yeah, I think it was a mix of there were studio segments with like animation thrown in there.
Yeah. Well, as always, interesting stuff with the scheduling. But with that, I guess we should get into this episode.
Yeah.
City of Evil. And as with most Thundarr episodes, it begins in media res.
Wait a minute, Mike. I thought you said they were all over the place. You said they had different locations, and now you're saying they all started in media res. Which is it?
It's both.
I'm
being intellectual.
Okay.
The action's already happening.
Okay, gotcha.
We should go to Boston. That's where they are this episode, in the greater Boston Swampscott area. And it starts, we see some sort of giant mutant goat creatures being used to pull old Earth cars. And one has a wizard in it, and the other ones have his sort of robot minions in them. And Thundarr and Ookla and Ariel are in pursuit, and that they're on one of the freeways there in the Boston area, next to exit Swampscott. And so I don't know, I-95 maybe. And so this wizard is named Sarat. I feel like it's mostly because of his color scheme. He's wearing green and yellow. He looks a little bit like a haggard Loki to me.
Ooh, yeah, I can see that. That's a good call.
Got a funny hat. He's got some Fred Flintstone 5 o'clock shadow.
Yes.
Some other scruffy whiskers. I don't think normally he would be up there with the other wizards they've faced. He seems a little less than.
Like a B tier wizard.
Yes.
Yeah. Gotcha.
He's wearing some kind of glove, and he's like shooting beams at them and stuff, and this is what they want. They need to recover this gauntlet from him. And they trap him at the edge of where a freeway, an overpass is broken, and Ariel uses her magic and pulls the gauntlet off his hand, and he falls into the water below, possibly to his doom. But as Ariel says, you can never be sure with a wizard.
Although Thundarr seems pretty sure.
Well,
he's like, well, that finishes him, and I don't think he rubs his hands together, with the old that's that gesture, but he kind of pretty much seems to have ruled any comeback out.
Nuance is not one of Thundarr's areas of
apparently not
expertise. He's pretty much fight and ride.
Yeah, okay.
So if he looks dead, sure, he's dead. And many episodes, by the way, end with wizards possibly dying, but there's always the hint that they might come back.
That Saturday morning ambiguity.
Yes. Sometimes they just vanish,
Ah,
in a glow of energy or something. And then in the next scene, we find out Surratt is indeed alive and he's crestfallen, demoralized, wandering through the ruins of Boston. And he falls through, I guess it's a roof. I don't know. Anyway, he falls into this basement of a building. At first, he thinks it's just, I think he calls it a cesspit or something. But there's all this broken equipment around and the sign Experimental Research Lab. So maybe it's MIT
ooh,
or
could
Harvard.
be, could be. Yes.
He goes into this other room and there's like this transparent pyramid that's glowing and it has a tiny city inside it. And when he touches the pyramid, his big glowing face appears. And this is Voltec, the ruler of the City of Thieves, voiced by Henry Corden. And he explains that before the cataclysm, their city was miniaturized in an experiment. And so they were spared, but they have, in these thousands of years, have failed to restore the city. So Surratt says he will help them with his magic, but only if they agree to join him and make mankind and other wizards slaves. And they're like, sure.
Yeah. Well, a place called the City of Thieves, I guess we shouldn't have expected too much virtue from them.
Right. I don't know why. Yeah, it's interesting. So was the City of Thieves a city full of thieves that some scientists miniaturized because they were thieves?
Mm-hmm.
Where did the city exist before? I mean, it didn't exist in Boston.
Well, that's another part that we're in media res on, I guess.
That's right. We just got to roll with that. And of course, Surratt realizes in order to help them, he'll need to get the gauntlet back. So we see Thundarr and the gang returning the gauntlet to this village where it belongs, which is at the remains of Logan Airport. And later, apparently, I didn't have access to any subtitles or anything. According to the internet, the village, they call it Raporta.
Yes, I saw that come up. I don't remember the spelling of it, but
Anyway, they give the leader of this gang, or this village, Gorn, the gauntlet, and he puts it on, and then they're having a party, and Ukla's dancing with a woman, and Ariel says something like, I didn't know Mox could dance, and then he falls, and Thundarr says, they can't.
doesn't he do the hearty throwback of the head, too?
Yes.
You can tell he's really enjoying it.
Right. He also doesn't have a subtle sense of humor.
No, he doesn't.
Like Ariel's always making all these smart remarks, and he just like no sells them or takes them literally. But his buddy falling on his tush.
It's a nice little party, though.
It is.
You see a couple of seconds of great dancing footage. I would have liked to have enjoyed more of that, but they move on pretty quickly. They got other things to do.
That's right. So from the rocks above, Surratt zaps Gorn and turns him into a monster that, I mean, he's still man-shaped, but he's got giant bat wings. Something's going on with his head. Like his hair is all out of control. I think he might have some fangs. And later we see that he has a laser breath. And he's got snake arms. One of them has a snake head on it instead of a hand. The other one still has the gauntlet. And he's like totally out of control. So even Surratt can't control him.
Yeah, it's a really wild creation.
Yes. And of course it leads to one of my favorite exclamations. Demon dogs. Gorn attacks Surratt. He smashes stuff. He briefly captures Ariel. Thundarr saves her. And then Gorn flies away, and Thundarr tells the others to ride. And they get on their horses and head after him because they want to help him. They're good people,
Yes.
And in fact, that's like their whole motivation this episode. It's just, we got to help Gorn.
They don't lose sight of that, relatively small goal. I mean, there's bigger things at stake, but I kind of like that they keep in mind that they need to do a solid for Gorn and rescue him. That's pretty cool.
And Surratt goes back and has to explain to Voltec that he didn't get the gauntlet, and Voltec scolds him, but then gives him access to the city's attack swarm. And so it's a swarm of guys on tiny little flying flying ATVs or something.
And it's ready to go. Like, apparently in 2,000 years of being miniaturized, they're still committed to keeping themselves ready for any outside threat.
Yes.
So they get going right away.
I wonder if they go out, occasionally to get resources or something.
Ah, good point. Maybe they do.
And people, in that area just complain about the mosquitoes shooting lasers through walls and things.
Yeah.
But I loved that. Again, that just seemed like just a wild idea. And although he wasn't writing, it's very Jack Kirby.
Yes, and the fact that, like, with that bombastic voice, he makes a big declaration out of giving him access to his attack swarm, and just the fact that it's a self proclaimed attack swarm. That's what they call themselves. I love that too.
And back with the Thundarr and company, they're riding up a trail along one of two volcanoes, following Gorn, and then they stop to get off their horses, and he uses his laser breath and blocks their way, and Ariel and Ukla fall and are hanging from a ledge, and then Thundarr falls and almost lands in a river of lava, but he uses his sun sword to hook into a telephone pole and then climbs above and pulls them up.
Yeah, he gets up pretty quickly.
He does. They didn't really show him get past them.
No.
Had to put that together myself.
Yeah, let's put that in the economy of storytelling department, that they didn't bother to detail exactly how he got up there so quickly.
Right. It was happening while Ariel was making her wisecrack.
Yes.
So, everything's good, right? They're going back after Gorn. And then immediately Surratt and the Swarm show up, to which Thundarr makes his other exclamation, Lords of Light! And the Swarm honestly doesn't do very well against them.
No, they don't put up much opposition. They're more of a nuisance than a real threat, aren't they?
Yeah, Ukla swats a bunch of them. One just sort of crashes into Thundarr's boot.
Yeah.
I don't know if he had gotten hit or something, but, and Thundarr swinging his sword at them, and then they sort of leave. Surratt doesn't like that, but they're smart. We're not so good against the giants.
Yeah, they make a strategic retreat.
So Thundarr and the others, they follow Gorn again. He attacks them again, and Ukla falls almost into a volcano, but he doesn't quite hit the lava. And Ariel grabs him with some magic rope things. But then there's a lava monster, and it grabs him from the other end. So one conflict after another here.
Yep, it's always something.
Yeah, it's very Saturday morning serial kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Just cliffhanger after cliffhanger.
Yeah, all within the same episode.
Yeah. And Thundarr jumps down there and fights the monster and finally hurts it enough to free Ukla. And then they continue their search for Gorn and move into the swamps. And Ariel does a spell and they look down in this pond and are able to see what's going on with Surratt and Gorn. And the Swarm had captured Gorn, by the way. They used their lasers to make a net, and they captured him. So they see that Surratt uses the gauntlet to enlarge the city, and of course the city has had 2,000 years to develop unhindered by cataclysm, and it's, this grand science fiction metropolis. And they're flying tanks and planes, and of course the first thing Surratt wants to do with all this power is go crush the village of 10 people at an airport.
Yeah, let me say something. I've gone into Logan Airport a few times, and I can share his frustration with how hard it is to get around there sometimes. I think I've told you for a while that my dad would pick me up at Manchester, New Hampshire, instead of Logan. But this is a little extreme, his vendetta against this area, I will say that. So, it's a little disproportionate.
Again, I was going to ask a question, what did they do to him? But you know what? We're not going to get the answer. Who cares?
Yeah.
But as soon as he says that, Thundarr lets out his battle cry, which I'm not going to try to impersonate that.
It was pretty awesome, though.
It is pretty awesome, yeah.
Is that his catchphrase?
That's his third catchphrase.
Yes, basically, ah.
And he goes riding in, and he tells Ariel and Ukla to find Gorn, and she's like, you can't battle an entire city alone. And he just says, no, and then proceeds to battle an entire city on his own.
One thing I love about cartoons of this era and villains of this era is the frequent use of fools as an insult. And I believe Thundarr says it as well, right? He says, aside, fools.
He does, yeah.
He says, it's Surratt I want.
Right. And he takes out that whole flying tank with his sword, and it's pretty awesome. I think these City of Thieves guys, they might have technology, but they're a little soft. I mean, what have they been fighting? They haven't encountered a barbarian.
2,000 years of inactivity has dulled their fighting edge, I think.
Exactly. Meanwhile, Ariel uses some magic bubbles to knock out a guard, and then she tries to break the spell on Gorn and can only partially do it, and he wheezes out that they need to destroy the gauntlet. So she goes back to Thundarr and tells him that, and he's fighting Surratt and blocks a shot from him, a magic shot, and knocks him down, and then he takes the gauntlet and destroys it, which reverses the spell on Gorn and sends out this wave of energy that totally destroys the city.
And I'm laughing because, you were describing it, it really is kind of this remarkable looking city, and like you said, unsullied by cataclysm, and yet, in the span of 5 seconds, the plus a little bit of extra destruction by Thundarr. It's all gone very quickly.
Yeah. And Thundar's, they've got Surat captured, and he's like, that just leaves the, the people of the city. And Ariel is like, whoa, they just lost everything.
Yeah.
Just leave them in the swamp. That's enough.
Yeah.
And they do seem very dejected.
Right. Yeah, that's really the word for it. Just total dejection, which is good. You don't always get that kind of satisfaction from bad guys being defeated in a cartoon, but you certainly get it here. There's no defiant, waving their arms and saying they'll be back. It's just kind of like, oh no.
Right. And then, Thundarr, Ariel, and Ukula to ride. And that's it.
Yeah. And I kind of think the gauntlet, it was maybe too powerful to not be destroyed. That was probably the right decision. Just take it off the chessboard and not have that be used for evil purposes anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
And let me make a point here, is the kind of going to like the whole idea of starting over. Like, this is the first episode of Thundarr I'd seen in years, and I was kind of wondering, like, I think, would you not agree that to like a viewer, like just starting this episode, it would be reasonable to assume that you missed a lot of stuff because like maybe this gauntlet thing was explained before, this village, like a lot of this stuff you might think would have been established in a previous episode.
No.
Not the case, huh?
No, I believe that Gauntlet might fall under the super science heading.
Yeah.
From the opening credits. And yeah, the rest, I mean, other than Thundarr having a beef with wizards, that's like a continuing threat. And the wizards seem to be like warlords, sort of. There aren't any good ones, as far as I know.
Now, mind you, I'm not complaining. You get a good solid 20 minutes. It's very well paced, and they don't bother to stop and explain a lot of this stuff. You get your introduction, which I believe was veteran performer Dick Tufeld is the guy that does the narration at the beginning. I want to add, Robbie the Robot and voices on other cartoons and other projects over the years. But you get enough that you need to just dive into it, and then the show just takes you along and has all this wild stuff happening, and it makes for a pretty exciting experience, especially watching it now without commercials. You just blow right through everything. It's pretty cool, with the cliffhangers, like you said, and maybe like a commercial break. You can see where the original commercial break would be for like one particular thing, but overall they're just running through it.
Yeah, I like that. We mentioned Jeffrey Scott, of course, and Spider-Woman, and I mean, this is a jam-packed, kind of nutty episode, but it feels a little more cohesive than Spider-Woman.
Yes, and Dick Tufeld was also did the narration at the beginning of Spider-Woman, too.
Oh, hey.
Everything's connected.
So, I think although there are plenty of things to enjoy in a humorous way, it does hold together a little better, a lot of Saturday morning cartoons. And it does, I would not call it violent, but it certainly pushes the edge of that more than like Super Friends did. He does like smash things and slice up robots and stuff.
Yeah, like right at the beginning of this, he there's a pretty graphic dispatching of a robot that it's pretty impressive. But now to me, again, it's kind of tough to look at it, looking at it by modern standards. It doesn't seem all that violent to me either. I mean, we've seen far more, far worse stuff quite recently, but I guess I could see how it might have been considered that way just because people were so concerned about violence on Saturday mornings for a while there. But to me, it's still, family friendly. It's more in the adventure side of things. And really a lot of fun. It throws in like tons of elements of just like, okay, wouldn't this be cool if this were in a cartoon, and puts them all together. And yeah, I can dig that. I really enjoyed this episode.
Yeah. You kind of alluded to this. It's a little bit of a throwback too to like the Herculoids and those sort of cartoons from, I guess those were all sort of late 60s, Johnny Quest. And I mean, the music is very Johnny Quest.
Yeah.
That's good to see. I like those cartoons. So it's good that someone was trying that again.
Yeah, and we rattled off, all the other cartoons, and you mentioned Black Star, but, not a lot of pure action apart from that. You had Super Friends, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, but a lot of it was this weird blend of like classic adventure and cutesy characters and classic cartoon characters was making up Saturday morning at the time.
Yeah, like a couple years before it, there had been the Filmation Flash Gordon, which had one season that was very much like an adventure and similar to Thundarr, and then a second season that kind of dumbed that down and added a cute character and stuff. And there was the Filmation Tarzan cartoon, and maybe that Lone Ranger one. I don't remember much about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of cutesy stuff and Pac-Man and things like that.
Right.
It's kind of unique. Well, until Black Star came along.
Yes.
Yes, I am glad I did. I sat down and watched the whole DVD set. Enjoyed all of them.
Yeah, the only other one I watched actually in preparation for the podcast was the werewolves one that takes place in Washington D.C. with the pack leader of the werewolves named Zevon, which was amusing, and I really enjoyed that too. And Lori does remember watching the show growing up, so she's interested in seeing some more of these. So I look forward to watching more of them. Maybe not 2 or 3 in a row, but I could see us going through a lot of these in a relatively short period of time, watching them at a pretty steady rate. It's a fun show. I want to see more of it.
So the werewolf one, other than the Zevon thing, which I thought was hilarious. My other favorite thing is that they heal the werewolves by putting them in the reflecting pool in front of between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument.
Yes.
Who knew?
There must be some kind of magical quality in that water that heals them. However Ariel puts it. Well, yeah, I guess so. But I certainly wouldn't have thought that, but yeah.
Besides werewolves and wizards, which we've mentioned, other episodes include birdmen and tigermen and ratmen, and there's at least one wizard who's just a floating head, and just all sorts of stuff like that. It's great. You never know what you're going to see.
Do you have a particular favorite episode other than these ones that we haven't mentioned, or... I mean, it seems like they're all so wild. Just looking at some of the episode descriptions, you can see at least one thing in there that like, oh, that's kind of interesting.
Exactly, yeah. I think they're all equal. There's the one I mentioned with the airship with the giant head. I liked a lot of that, but then the end of that is a little... In terms of your heroes saving the day, it leaves it up to some other people to do. And it seemed to introduce some new characters, and then they go away in a way. So, but it's still a pretty fun episode. I think it might be the last episode or second to last episode, but there's something for everyone.
And yeah, credit to Warner Archive for putting these out on DVD and more recently on Blu-ray. I don't think they're really available. I think they've been on Cartoon Network, I think or Boomerang, one of those used to show those in reruns for a while, but I don't think they're available on streaming anywhere right now, though you can purchase individual episodes, but they are available on home video, which is cool.
Yeah, and I was telling you right before we started recording, I saw Warner Brothers posted a clip in HD on YouTube, and the quality is really astounding. So sort of half considering upgrading my DVDs, but we'll see.
Yeah, and if you're interested, there's only, I think, maybe like 21 episodes. It'd be pretty easy to plow through them once you get into them, so it's not a huge commitment.
Well, I think that's all I have to say about Thundarr. Thanks for indulging my desire to talk about it.
It was a pleasure, and something that, had been in my mind and kept thinking, oh, you know what, I should go back and watch that. So I really enjoyed it, and like I said, I'm gonna keep up with Thundarr, and I'll definitely be watching more of this now that I've gotten a taste of it.
Okay, and if you want to talk about Thundarr or Black Star or Brave Star, even
Space Stars,
the NBC Superpower Kid Super Hour, whatever,
The More You Know PSAs that had the star in them.
Yes, yeah.
Night of 100 Stars.
Night of 100 Stars, sure, yeah.
All right, yeah.
Our Facebook group is a great place to do that. And you can find us. Just search Battle of the Network Shows on the Facebook. Answer a few questions, and there we are. And we have a lot of fun discussions. And it's a good place for you to suggest shows. Or you can email us, right?
You certainly can. We've gotten a couple of great suggestions already for our next season. And you can email us at mailbag@battleofthenetworkshows.com. And give us feedback, thoughts on the show. If you do have a recommendation for a request, just make sure you tell us it's okay to read it on the air. We'd love to give you credit and share a few comments or thoughts, and we might even write you back if you have a request for a topic, because we'd love to get your thoughts on the show, especially when the show ideas come from you.
Yeah. Okay.
This episode brought to you by Lords of Light. This episode also brought to you by the Swamps of Swampscott. This episode also brought to you by Uklo the Mock's Greatest Hits, including All the Young Mutants and All the Way from Ancient Earth's Memphis. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.